Welcome back to the Spiderforest Webcomic Podcast. I'm Mathieu Moyen. In this episode, Uneasy Money. It used to be that the only way to get into print comics was with a lot of hard work and by raising a lot of capital. And, well, the hard work part hasn't changed, but websites like Kickstarter have opened up a vast new source of funding for comic creators to make the leap from web to print. But it's not as easy as just clicking a link, and we're going to talk about the ups and downs of crowdfunding in this episode. First, I'll be talking with Jason Brubaker, creator of the graphic novels Remind and Sithrah, about his experiences with grants and crowdfunding. Then, Eva, creator of the comic Bits Fair, will bring us a discussion with Ben Fleuter of the comic The Sword Interval, Christina Major of the comic Sombulus, and Ally Rom Colthoff of the comic Chirault, who will all take us through their own experiences with starting and fulfilling comics on Kickstarter. We're all going to try to make sense of those dollars in this episode, so stay with us. Hi, I'm Mathieu Moyen, and I produce the webcomic Six Commando. Jason Brubaker and I met back in 2008 when he was just starting his first graphic novel, Remind. At the time, he was one of the first comic artists to use Kickstarter to fund a comic project that raised over $10,000. Since then, he has funded 5 more projects, with results ranging from $30,000 to over $100,000. This success came with an enormous amount of commitment, though, as he's the first to admit. He and I caught up recently, just as he was about to launch his 7th Kickstarter campaign for Book 3 of his current graphic novel, Sithrah. We talked a little bit about his work and how he's managed to use Kickstarter to fund his self-publishing projects. You seem to me to span 2 different generations of comic creating, because you were the last person, not the last person, but among the last people to win a Xeric grant, back when Xeric grants were a thing. And then you were also one of the first people to fund a really successful Kickstarter campaign for a graphic novel.
Yeah, it was this really weird, perfect moment, right? Right at that moment. Because I think the Xeric grant, their statement and why they quit was because of Kickstarter. You know, people were actually able to get funding now for these obscure projects, which they weren't before. And so the Xeric grant kind of served as this, means of getting funding. So once they saw that people were getting a lot of money on Kickstarter, they're like, well, we'll just focus our efforts on these other things. Because the company was split into 2 different parts. They funded comics and some else, some Feed the Hunger. I don't know what it was, but
Public advocacy of some kind, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Kickstarter was, both of them I kind of went into like going, I don't know if either one of these are going to work. And I wasn't even sure if I wanted to really self-publish. I just wasn't sure what my options were. And I really wanted to get an agent and then try to, get a book deal through like Scholastic or something. But that's just hard to do before getting published with your very first book. And so I decided to try the Xeric grant, and I was just kind of crossing my fingers and just waiting on that before I made any decisions. And then when that money came in, it was about the same time that people were saying, hey, you should do this new thing called Kickstarter. And I was like, I don't think that's going to work. I don't want to spend a month waiting to see if people actually want to spend money on this project. But then once the Xeric grant money came in, I was like, well, I might as well try it because I actually have enough to print a decent quality printing. It's not quite enough to print as nice as I would like it. So maybe I'll just have a little goal for Kickstarter. And at that time, I think the number was around $3,000 that the highest graphic novel comic funding would come in at. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to set it at $3,000. And so that mixed with the Xeric grant money really gave me a nice amount of money to print these really nice hardcover books, which was my goal. And it ended up raising $12,000, like $12,600. And that kind of just completely blew my mind. And it really changed the way I looked at being able to possibly make a living at this stuff. Because, the fans were actually coming out of the woodwork now, and they were really putting money down. That was really a strange feeling. And yeah, it seems like ever since that point, it seems like Kickstarter really started taking off for comics. It's like as soon as mine was done, there was a campaign that went to like 30,000. And then as soon as that was done, there was something that went to 50,000. And it just kind of kept going from there.
Do you think it was something to do with just that being the right, like people were suddenly realizing that they were ready for that, and or that the technology itself was kind of maturing at that time?
Yeah, I think it was, with the success of every new campaign, it kind of made everyone go, oh, that is working. And then someone else would try it, and then it got even more. And because I know my campaign raised a lot of eyebrows, and a lot of people were like, wow, you actually figured this out. But like someone else could have come in my place and probably done that exact same thing, and then if I would have jumped on the bandwagon, I might have made more than that 3 months later. I can only judge like what other people are thinking based on how I respond to things. And every time a new campaign was happening and getting bigger, it just kind of reaffirmed like, this is the way to go. I need to put more effort into it now, and even like build this into a business strategy now. And you can make $100,000 now. Oh, that's cool. And you can make $1 million now. What? And it just kind of across the board like made everyone realize this is possible, and it just kept incrementally getting bigger and bigger.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about it now is that it has figured so much in people's strategy. When you did it, it was new. I remember a number of people who were contemporaries of ours. Now, I've never Kickstarted a comic myself. I made my assessments and I figured, all right, this is probably going to just be online. Like maybe I'll print someday, but it really wasn't part of my strategy. But there are people who really go at that from the start with that being their strategy as well now. But at the same time, people who were contemporaries of ours back in like before 2010, they were people who would hold their work pretty close to their chest in hopes of sort of still getting along the traditional lines, which is like, I'm going to get a contract or I'm going to get some kind of a book deal with a traditional publisher. And that doesn't really seem to be the way it works at all anymore. And that changeover happened very fast.
Yeah, that's true. You really don't see that a lot anymore. I never even thought about that. But yeah, now it's about putting your stuff out there and getting kind of your own fan base, and then taking that to a publisher and saying, look what this is doing. Do you guys want a piece of this action?
Your model basically was sort of the webcomic model, which is, I'm doing this because I really like it. I'm doing this because I think I have confidence in it. And here it is. You put it out there and you give it to people for free. And then, conventional wisdom says, okay, you've given it to them for free. Why the hell are they going to pay for it? And yet people do. But there was also people at the same time who said, well, I'll give you a little bit for free, but then I'm going to go away because I don't want to give away too much. And those were the people who didn't make it.
Well, it's kind of like the TV model. Like if a TV show would come out and give you the first 2 episodes and then say, now you got to buy the DVD set, it just wouldn't work, I don't think. I mean, it's that ability to just see the whole thing, fall in love with it, and then want to collect it. And that's kind of my strategy from the start, was like, if I can just give everyone stuff so that they can fall in love with it, if they're anything like me, they would want to collect it and have it be this nice little object that they can open up and flip through every now and then and have on their bookshelf and show everybody who walks in the room, hey, look, I love this guy's art. I love this story. You can't do that by just having a bookmark on your computer to a website.
Well, it's interesting because that still places a great deal of value on the book as object, which is something that, again, seems to defy conventional wisdom, because these days the book is sort of, well, it's the book, so it's the information in the book. So the format doesn't really matter. In this model and in comics generally, it matters a whole lot, because the book as the object is the end result of all of the work that the person is putting into it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when the last Harry Potter book came out, people were just lining up to get that because they wanted to finish their set. They wanted to have that collection in their library. I always talk about it like this. Like, if you're an art collector, you're not going to settle for a digital copy on your computer that you can look at of a Rembrandt if you can have, and if you can afford, an actual Rembrandt hanging in your house. There's just no comparison. If you liked collecting sideshow collectible like statue figurines, you wouldn't be content with the full 3D model of it in your computer. You want to actually have that physical thing there sitting on your dresser. Whatever it is, that tangibleness, is so powerful to people. And it really stamps them as they are a serious collector of this person's work. I don't think we're ever going to really move away from that. There's going to always be a group of people who just want digital everything, And I admit I go through these phases where I get rid of a lot of stuff, but there's still things that I've had for a long time that I just don't want to get rid of. because it's just there's a memory attached to it, or I don't know, there's something special about it that a digital file will just not replace.
At the same time, Kickstarters, boy, they can really go south pretty fast too. I was thinking there was a guy who burned all of his Kickstarter books because people were asking for them to be delivered. Basically, he had some kind of nervous breakdown and wrote this long, tendentious tirade and was just like, "Leave me alone! I can't do it anymore." Which I hate to laugh about it because you got to feel for somebody who gets themselves in over their head, but Kickstarter can really get you in over your head too. I mean, that's
Yeah, I've done, I guess, lectures on it to people like how to do Kickstarter successful and stuff like that. And one of the things that it seems like it's across the board is that there's a post-Kickstarter depression that happens. And it doesn't matter if you've had a successful Kickstarter or it didn't fund at all, or you funded $100,000 over what you expected, or you came in right at your goal. It kind of almost doesn't matter. It's because there's this horrible emotional tug of war going on because you want it to be amazingly big, but you also, I don't know, it's like it's never enough. And then once it gets to be so big, there's no way you can fulfill it on your own. And so it becomes this horrible like dilemma of like, do I quit my job now to do this thing, which I blew all the money printing the books, but I got to still fulfill it because I'm promising it and everyone's seeing it and there's 2,000 people looking at me, judging me. And it's really horrible on your emotions and your brain. And anyone who's like struggles with depression, it's like, man, you really need to have yourself surrounded by friends and family who are going to support and help you. Otherwise, if your campaign is successful, it could be really self-destructive. And it's a weird thing to think about because you would think, oh, that would solve all my problems if I made all that money and it was successful. But, because I experienced, a fraction of what that other guy is going through or went through with my most successful campaign. It just felt like this giant weight, almost like this giant burden that I couldn't get rid of after a while because it was just so much work. And I was trying to do freelance jobs to be able to fulfill the obligations that I had promised people. It got me to the point to where after that campaign was done, I said, I need to take a year off of comics. I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. But I was able to actually fulfill it. So I don't know where my mind would be as if I couldn't fulfill it. If I was like $50,000 short because shipping was ridiculous or something like that, and it was a mountain of books that there's no way I could get out or afford to get out, I don't even know what I would do, But people find themselves in that situation because anyone can make a Kickstarter. You don't have to know anything about business. All you got to do is present something that convinces people to throw money at you, and then suddenly you can find yourself in over your head trying to manage something that you've never, ever been responsible for before. And so that's the only problem with Kickstarter. But it's such a great tool, though. If you can tiptoe into it and make one small campaign at the beginning, learn from that, make a bigger one next, and just keep going. It's amazing. It's such a beautiful tool.
Hello, I'm Eva and I make a comic called Bits Fair. And we are going to discuss crowdfunding some more with a few members of the Spiderforest Collective. Here with me are Ally Rom Colthoff, the creator of Chirault.
Hello.
Ben Fleuter, the creator of Derelict and The Sword Interval.
Hey there.
And Christina Major, the creator of Sombulus.
Hello.
So the first question I have is the question that somebody who has never run a Kickstarter campaign or generally a crowdfunding campaign would ask themselves. How do you know that it's a good idea for you to run such a campaign at all? What are the signs that you look for? How do you know that this is the time to do it?
Whether or not it's a good time to run a crowdfunded campaign is a really tricky question that I definitely didn't know the answer to when I started mine. I think you have to have a really objective understanding about if your comic is print ready yet, both technically having your pages at 300 DPI, CMYK, all that good stuff. Sometimes people start webcomics and they just target it towards screen resolution, and no, you might have to update some things if you do that. But also it's a hard personal question that might take some outside peer feedback about where you are art-wise and story-wise. I know with Sombulus, I cut out about 30 pages from my first chapter and restructured the story a lot so that it would be stronger. And it was still tough. And the tricky thing is you can ask your readers if they want books or they think you're ready, but there's a big difference between saying you would hypothetically buy something and actually buying it.
I think those points are really good. And also just knowing how ready your comic is itself, a good way to test that is just to go through the process of preparing it for print and contacting printers and getting sort of all your balls in a row, so to speak, before you even go through the process of getting the Kickstarter ready. Because once you know how much it's going to cost you to get it printed and whether your book is even ready, that's kind of step one, so to speak. I've seen campaigns where people launched without having those things done. And then even if their campaign succeeds, they need to spend like an entire year just getting the book ready. And then they find out it's going to cost them more to print than they think it will. And there's all these little hiccups that can be introduced along the way. And those can cascade if you don't start as late in the process as you can.
I probably launched a little too early. I definitely had all of those hiccups along the way with the fulfillment taking about a year and spending a lot of money out of pocket. And while I may have had the reader base do the funding, I just was very ignorant of a lot of ways to run a Kickstarter. My first Kickstarter, which was Derelict, I had gotten to the end of the first book, and it had a pretty decent and active readership, so I just kind of jumped in and did it, and I was lucky enough that it did reach funding, more than the funding I asked for. So I think, as Christina said, I think getting feedback from peers is actually a great way probably the only way to know for sure.
Yeah. And to Ben's point, I do recommend waiting on launching a Kickstarter until you have a healthy following, because you not only need people who read your comic, you need people with audiences on social media and other networks to spread the word for you. And a lot of times this is going to be other comic creators. So if you've been a lone wolf creator and you don't talk to or read anybody else's webcomics, I strongly recommend getting to know other comic creators. Whether that's joining the Spiderforest forums, yay, participating in Twitter hashtag events or Facebook groups, or, putting some dollars in other people's campaigns and telling them about your plans in advance. Or just involving them in the process of planning, getting them to proofread things for you, telling them your schedule and your thoughts. That's another good way to start building that audience so that when you're ready to launch, you have the base to spread the word for you.
A lot of people say that you should promote your thing on social media, but it always seemed a bit strange to me, because how likely is it that somebody who does not read your comic is going to see that you are running a Kickstarter and just spontaneously decide to back it and just
Pretty
buy
likely,
this book?
actually.
Really?
Very likely. It's about 75% in a lot of cases. I mean, it varies from person to person, but Dawn Griffin, who does Zorf, Bird, and Fred, actually did a great breakdown of a Kickstarter that she did, which is on the Webcomic Alliance site, and it was 75% for her.
Wow.
Just people will absolutely jump in, and you have no idea who they are. They did not come from your site. They came from like Kickstarter discovery things, or they came from a thing. But that is the thing. There are a lot of people who don't read webcomics. They read print books. And when you make a Kickstarter, you are reaching the audience that you have not reached before, which is people who like print books. So yeah, expect that. Absolutely.
You'll get the people who might be aware of you on social media or read other comics who've been seeing pictures of your work when your friends reblog it or something, and now they see you have a Kickstarter and they're like, oh, this will be a good chance to kind of jump in and check this thing out that's been on my radar for a while, but I've never really looked at it. So it's not even just like people who are totally unfamiliar, but also people who might have been kind of watching you or lurking for a while. You never know. But on the subject of people who have never seen your work before, this is why it's important to kind of make your campaign as accessible and visually appealing and graphic as you can, because that'll help those people look at it and see, oh, this looks good. I want to find out more about it. You want to make a good first impression to people who've never heard of you before.
On the subject of planning, how much planning did you do before you launched your first campaign and your second campaign?
So much planning. I tried to get as much done before I launched as I possibly could, and I went out of my way to contact all of my friends who had run campaigns in the past or who seemed like they knew things about marketing or had bits of knowledge that I was totally lacking. I made a draft version of the campaign and shared it to like absolutely everybody I knew who might possibly have any like words of advice on it. I shared my my book, the PDF version of it, with all the pages that I've been editing to get ready for print, just to see if anybody could catch like art errors that I'd missed or things that I needed to clean up from my old artwork or typos, everything. So every step of the process I was trying to get as much feedback on as I could. And I really think it made a huge difference in how the campaign turned out.
I come from a graphic design background, and I definitely know a lot about how to get quotes from printers and things like that. So yeah, to Ally's point, getting that done was step one in both of my campaigns. And I almost planned the first one a little more than the second one, and that was probably a mistake. Because, I did the first one and it was successful. And so I said, okay, well, I know exactly what to do now. But I didn't really follow my own advice and reach out for feedback from other people and get the same degree of guidance that I got for my first book. And I think that was a mistake. I think you really do need to keep in touch with people and let them know your plans so that it's not sneaking up on everybody.
I kind of fell into the same sort of thing where I really, really planned my first one, and then I feel like my second one was a little more winged it. And I mean, it's kind of a silly sort of feeling, but in a way, after I got done with book one, I was like, oh, well, I mean, do I need to bother people for help now? Like, I did one already.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you should still always get feedback. Like, I wish that I'd done that, and I'm definitely going to be much more active about it when I do my next Kickstarter.
I think that makes a lot of sense, though. You're doing a whole new thing that involves, a lot of like money, and you have to bring a lot of other professionals in on the printing side. So I think it makes sense. That the first one, you're going to plan everything and think of every possibility, and then you're like, I got it. No, I'm good. I'm fine.
But every book is going to be a little different. Like my third book might be 250 pages long, which is massive.
Oh dear.
And my fourth and fifth might be 300 pages, and that's going to be
Oh, no.
a totally different beast to even think about than my first one.
Yeah. Oh, that is something to think about in planning is figure out how much your book's probably going to weigh.
Yeah.
And figure out how much that costs to ship,
Yes.
both domestic and internationally, because that is a huge part of budgeting is figuring out shipping. And I don't know if there's a good way to really do that myself.
What's nice about Kickstarter that they've added just recently, by recently I mean like last couple months when we ran the Spiderforest coloring book in October, they do have breakdowns for shipping now based on country. So the old way that you had to do it was kind of figure out, build it into your tier and hope you didn't lose too much money. But now there is a way to like specify every single country that you want to specify shipping for, and then say, and everywhere else charge $30 or whatever. It's really cool. That didn't exist for my first and second Kickstarters, but yeah, as of October 2016, that was an option and it was a lifesaver. So what you want to do is you get a book that is approximately the same size and weight as what you're going to ship, somebody else's graphic novel or whatever, pack it all up, take it to the post office and say, I want to ship this to, I'm talking as somebody from the United States, so this is going to be different depending on where you are, but if you're in the United States, you just find every English-speaking country that you want to send it to and say, how much will it cost to ship this package here, 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 and here? And then kind of break your shipping tiers down like that. And that seems to work unless the U.S. Postal Service changes their shipping rates, which they like to do. So yeah, shipping is always going to cost more than you think it will.
One thing that I've always wondered about when it comes to the shipping was how do you organize all of it? Because you have all these people who have pledged at all sorts of different levels and they are all receiving different stuff. And how do you make sure that you don't send the wrong stuff to the wrong person or just completely forget about somebody? How do you organize the whole thing?
The dashboard in Kickstarter has a lot of tools around that. It'll collect the addresses of people that you have to ship to. It has a little checkbox where you can, say, I sent this reward. There's a box where you put notes. And so that's very helpful. So getting to know that Kickstarter interface is good. I also use an Excel spreadsheet to kind of track where I am with each person. And yeah, just be really careful. Work one tier at a time. If you're sending out the book and the bookmark, just do that day instead of trying to mix and match. And yeah, just do one tier at a time.
The Kickstarter tools are really good for organizing things and keeping track of everybody who's in a different tier. But there's still a little bit of room for things to get a bit fuzzy if you're doing things like letting people add to their pledge tier because they want an item from a different tier without the rest of the rewards. Like some people might say, well, if you're pledging for just the book and you want the prints, but you don't want the postcards or the mini comic or something else that's in all the tiers above that have those rewards, people can make their pledge and add $10 to it or however much you ask for, but they'll still be recorded as being on the lower pledge and you won't. I mean, you can make a note of it on their profile, but it's possible that that can get kind of lost in the shuffle once you're starting to fulfill things because it's not like they're still sorted with the people who are just getting the book and no prints. And you have to make sure that you include a form on the survey that they can write down like what they want on that. There's a little bit of room for things to get complicated there. And especially, I think some people have been doing on third book and up campaigns. They might have a tier for something like get 2 books and you choose which ones they are for people who might already have book 1 and they want 2 and 3. But you never know until you're actually starting to send out the surveys and getting those back, whether they might actually want book 1 and 3 or 1 and 2. And that introduces a little bit of complexity in terms of do you have enough of your earlier books to make sure that you fulfill those? Like there's some stuff to think about that there's no perfect process for kind of staying on top of it. So every campaign handles it a little differently, I think.
Note keeping that's kind of on you if you want to add that much extra stuff. And I guess my advice would be if you're doing your first Kickstarter, just try and keep it simpler and for your own sake. And maybe because you'll only have your first book, you won't need to worry about having 3 different books and what book do they want. So it depends how comfortable are you, the person making the Kickstarter, with keeping track of spreadsheets on your own and all these other rewards, or do you want to just, if someone asks for something, be like, no.
Just no, you can't have that.
You can't.
No.
I mean, probably yes, but then, you have to keep track of that yourself, because like you said, Kickstarter doesn't keep track of that, but otherwise its own little interface is pretty good for the basics, I think.
If this is your first Kickstarter, do not throw everything in the kitchen sink into your campaign. It is not necessary to make lapel pins and bookmarks and bonus stories and replicas of people's costumes and like commission a jewelry expert to make necklaces. And it gets a little crazy because people have so many ideas that their first outlet for those ideas is their first Kickstarter, but try to hold yourself back. That is my advice.
What sort of tiers would you recommend for somebody launching their first crowdfunding campaign?
Start with digital. Things like a PDF version of the book and some wallpapers is good. Try to have a tier that is around $20, $25 or less that's just the book by itself with no special add-ons and things for people who... There's a lot of people that is just what they want. And then maybe a version of the book that you've sketched in for a little more than that. And then any other things you can produce relatively cheaply and easily that you can get out there, like prints or little postcards or something. Those might be your tier from like $50 to $70. And if you are willing to do commissions and things like that, you can add a few tiers for that sort of thing in the $100 to $200 range. That's usually the basic kind of tier structure that I see.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown. I also like to do like a be in the comic tier, so they'll get a cameo as a background character or something like that. And if you've already made your pages, maybe it's just like changing your art a little bit so one of the background characters is this guy or whatever. That can run into a few problems because then you have to get reference pictures from the person, and that might impact your production time. But if you want to like incorporate it into a future page and they're okay with that, that's good too. And again, those can be in the $100 to $200 range. Make sure that you're limiting the things that are going to cost you more time or money. My top tier is always, I have a friend who does these really cool sculptures. And so there's only one, but she'll do this sculpture, some creature or something that appears in Sombulus. But you can only offer one of those because that's a one-of-a-kind thing and requires all kinds of shipping and commissioning on her part. It's cool to integrate art from other people and kind of get a collaborative thing going. I know I like to do for stretch goals bookmarks by guest artists, which Ally has done for me. Yay! The danger of having other people collaborate with you is that you have to kind of work on their timetable, and that can push things out. And then you run into those things like, USPS changed their shipping dates and stuff. So things that you can fulfill quickly and easily, and preferably by yourself with very little effort on your part, that's the sweet spot right there.
I had a really fun sort of project on my first Kickstarter, which was like a little PDF booklet of guest art by a whole bunch of artists. And it was a really fun little kind of project to work on that had the capitalist benefit of the friends who participated would also post about the campaign, which helped it along.
Yes.
But it was separate from the main book, so I didn't have to wait for it to be finished in order to ship everything else out and get the rest of the campaign done. I mean, it was finished a little after the rest of the fulfillment had gone out, so if I had been forced to wait on that, if I'd been including it in the printed books or something, that could have been a source of delay. But I kept it as a digital-only thing that kind of lived by itself, so it didn't matter if it was, a month or two late, because it's just a fun little extra.
When it comes to delays, how do you deal with how do you manage your audience? Because just today I read a post somebody wrote where they talked about how they backed a Kickstarter campaign, and before it was even over, the people were already speculating about how there are definitely going to be delays. And we're already complaining about delays before the funding was even ended.
Oh no.
So,
Wow.
How do you manage this?
Transparency and honesty. If something delays you and it's taking a little while, more than like if something you can't solve in a couple of days, I say you just make a post, be like, hey, backers, this is what's going on. Just so you know, it's still something I'm working on, but it may take another month. I'll give you any updates as they come in.
Yeah, I think having different plans together helps. For the Spiderforest coloring book Kickstarter, we did have a delay in the bookmark production because the person who was going to do our cool 3D bookmarks had a problem with the 3D printer and it didn't work out. And so we were kind of scrambling to figure out, okay, can we get another 3D printer? Does anybody else know how to do this? What about other bookmark options? Could we do wood-burned bookmarks or holographic bookmarks, or what else can we get for that same price point? And there was a little bit of pushback about, hey, what's going on? Because here was a physical reward that I really didn't want to have to send separately from the book because it's just a silly little bookmark, but it held up everything. So definitely have a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D lined up. And then when you do face a delay like that, if you face a delay like that, I should say, tell people this is what's going on. Here are the steps we're going to go through to fix it. Just make sure you're positive about it if you can be. I know sometimes there's life emergencies and you can't be, but if you can, say, these are my plans. And if people know you have a plan and you sound professional about it, you won't get that much pushback at all.
Just also to make sure that you limit the tiers that require a lot of like labor from you, like commission tiers and stuff like that. Don't just leave those free. On the off chance that your campaign takes off and gets wildly successful and you only have enough time and ability to like make, one commission portrait drawing a week or something like that, and you've never done more than like 5 or 10, you don't want to have to end up doing 100 of them for your campaign. So like make sure you limit it to something that you reasonably feel you can handle within the time frame of finishing your Kickstarter.
My wife and I just usually have the routine where we put on movies we've already seen and we just make a little assembly line. If you can do that with a significant other or family or friends, just kind of make a couple days of it and just assembly line your packing. Say, we're going to do this tier today. Each person has this step. You wrap it up in bubble wrap, you put that in the envelope, you seal the envelope, and you just make stacks of this stuff packed up before you start attaching the printing labels and marking them as shipped. You just be like, okay, I spent a day, I packed up 200 copies of the signed version of the book. They're in this stack here where I put a little label. I might label each one with like a signed book would just say like SB on the package somewhere and just organize it that way. And yeah, help from friends and family.
I ran into a little weird little hiccup on my first book when I was, I did kind of throw like a small packing party. I think I got like 2 or 3 friends over and we just kind of packed books together. But I ran into a sort of unfortunate realization because on that Kickstarter, I had a reward where I printed this little series of postcards and there were 3 different pictures on the postcards and backers could choose which one they wanted. And that was my mistake because suddenly it wasn't as simple as like, oh, just put the book into each thing, close it up, and like we're done. We're just going to stick like labels onto each of them because everybody had chosen a specific postcard to go into their book. So I had all these like spreadsheets of like, okay, so this one wants this picture, this one wants this picture. And at first my friends were like trying to keep up, but then I was like, wait, like, hold on, we need to pay attention to this. And it gets really hard to organize that. So something to keep in mind if you have a lot of choice, letting backers choose between different things. So on my second book, I did not do the postcards.
I think that kind of goes back to earlier on we were talking about different reward tiers and how you don't want to have non-flat objects until pretty high up. You probably also would want to avoid on lower tiers having them able to pick something like that for that exact reason of, you end up getting maybe 100 or more people that get to pick a postcard and now that's all on you and that's just extra work for you. So
yeah, because your time takes, like, it's a resource. You don't have infinite amounts of it. It's just like money. Like, don't waste all of your time on something. Don't force yourself to put in a lot more work if you don't need to.
Because you still have to be doing your next book while fulfilling the last book.
You still have to make the pages to update your webcomic.
Yeah. And now you have to draw 100 commissions. Hopefully not 100.
If you can make a significant buffer for the duration of your campaign for your webcomic, do that. I really recommend that because a lot of your traffic is going to come from your readers and your readers aren't going to come to your site if you're not updating. So while you might feel like, oh, okay, I'm going to take a break because there's no way I can handle updating my webcomic and running this Kickstarter at the same time, you're going to miss out on those readers. So you kind of have to do double work. So yeah, anything you can do to prepare your buffer so that you have 4 weeks of updates, because you will be in a mental state where you will not be able to make updates.
When it comes to the mental state that one has during the campaign, then how do you deal with it all, with the stress and the excitement, and also having to stay positive and professional all the way through, even though this possibility of your campaign not funding must be looming somewhere over you? How do you deal with it all?
Vent in private?
Vent in private.
Yes, vent in private.
I don't know, other than, vent in private, or if you're not going to be relying on it financially, just tell yourself, hey, it's going to be okay no matter what. When the Kickstarter is over, succeed or fail, I think it's really important to take a day for just you to do some sort of celebration, like whatever celebration is to you, be that a party or just going and eating out or seeing a movie or buying yourself just something small and nice. Just take a you day to kind of put on that capstone, because otherwise all of that anxiety and that stress that you've been experiencing throughout your Kickstarter, even if it's going well, your brain will have a hard time. It'll keep being anxious, it'll keep being stressful, and your brain will be like, well, now where do I focus it?
One of the best pieces of advice I got was turn off your Kickstarter email notifications. Kickstarter will, by default, email you every time somebody makes or changes or deletes a pledge. Turn that off, because that is the biggest source of stress when your email notifications are going bling, 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 and you're wondering why people are dropping their bids or making new ones or what's going on. Just turn that off if that gets overwhelming, for sure. And yeah, just kind of to Ben's point, tell yourself it's going to be all right, because the blessing and the curse of Kickstarter is that if you don't reach your full funding goal, nothing happens. And I say that that's a blessing, even though it sucks to put in a lot of work and not get money. It's a good data point about how willing your audience actually is to give you money. And it builds your contact list. So if you have to relaunch your campaign, if it fails, it's really easy to do that. So yeah, you don't really know how your campaign is going to go until you do it. And if nothing else, it's a data point for what you have to work on in the future. And so many campaigns, so many people that I know have had a failed campaign and then they relaunched it and they went fine the next time. So that's always a possibility. And yeah, just keep in mind that it's not the end of the game if you don't fund. It's okay. But that's hard to tell yourself in the moment. Just try your best.
Yeah.
Back to stuff to do kind of in advance. One of the hardest things with a Kickstarter is that you have to market yourself and sound professional and chipper, even if you're feeling super stressed and like wondering like, I haven't gotten a pledge today. Like, what am I doing wrong? So if you plan out like some kind of marketing strategy in advance, like prepare graphics and prepare posts, and if you want to contact some blogging website or something to see if they'll write you up or something, do that a little before the campaign and try to plan for things that will go up during the middle section of the campaign, because that tends to be when the activity drops off. So the first day is the most important. Like, it's super front loaded, like throw as much stuff as you can to let everybody know that you've launched. But make sure you've got like just something that you're going to put out there for like week 2 and 3, because it can be really demoralizing when you see that like you tend to get a lot of pledges in the first week and then it drops off and it picks up again in the last week. But it's hard to remember that it'll pick up again when you're in that middle section and things just look so flat. You're like, oh, everybody's forgotten about me. What do I do? But if you have some like graphics or some posts that you drafted up already to like talk about your campaign, back when you were feeling nice and chipper, you can just like post those. You don't need to think about it because it's done. And you still got that like tone and energy that you had from the first week. Be something to help keep things going.
One thing that I did with my first Kickstarter campaign, I did not make it a 4-week campaign. I made it a 3-week campaign because I heard all these stories about, weeks 2 and 3, they're going to be dead. I'm like, well, maybe I'll just have one of those weeks then. Then there's only one in the middle. That'll work great. And it actually didn't do too bad. I didn't get as much money as I would have in my second campaign, which was a 4-week campaign, but it wasn't bad. And it was quicker and easier. And nobody seemed to come back to me and say, whoa, it ended a week earlier than I thought it was going to end. So there are options in Kickstarter about how many days your campaign wants to run. If it's going to be a smaller type print run, if it's just going to be a print on demand or something instead of something that you're trying to raise a whole lot of money for, that's an option. Make it shorter, make the pain go away quicker.
Well, and like it's almost a part-time job, and just how much time even if you don't have to be moderating anything, just how much time inevitably goes into just thinking about and looking at your Kickstarter. It's if you can make it shorter, that's awesome.
Well, it looks like we're out of time once again. This program is a production of the Spiderforest Webcomic Collective. Our executive producer is Christina Major, and Eva is our showrunner and our audio engineer. The Spiderforest Webcomic Collective is a creator-owned organization funded by voluntary contributions from our members and from readers and listeners like you. Thanks for your support, and don't forget to go to spiderforest.com to read some of the over 70 webcomics written and drawn by our members. And while you're there, you can also click on Support to make a donation. Your financial support makes our work possible, and we're very grateful for your assistance. I'd like to thank Jason Brubaker for joining us for this episode. You can read his comic Sithrah on webtoons.com. And I'd also like to mention that the day after our interview, Jason launched his Kickstarter for Sithrah Book 3, which funded with over $40,000. So congratulations to him on a job well done, and good luck to him with his next printing. I'd also like to thank Eva for bringing us this episode's discussion, as well as our members who participated, Ben Fleuter, Christina Major, and Ally Rom Colthoff. Ben produces the comic The Sword Interval. You can read it at swordinterval.com. He also produces the comic Derelict. You can read it at derelictcomic.com. Christina produces the comic Sombulus. You can read it at sombulus.com. Ally produces the comic Chirault. You can read it at chirault.sevensmith.net. And as a matter of fact, Ally is running a Kickstarter for Volume 3 of Chirault right now, and you still have time to get in on it. You can find it on Kickstarter.com, and we'll put a direct link to it at Spiderforest.com. Eva produces the comic Bits Fair. You can read it at bitsfair.com, and I produce the comic Six Commando. You can read it at viciousprint.com/sixcommando. I'm Mathieu Moyen. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bribe them with pizza.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pizza
I mean,
party.
don't lie. Don't say we're all having a party and then invite them over and have like a table full of books. Like, but
I'm never coming to your party again, Ben.
let them know what you're doing. But it can be fun. I'm actually really looking forward to that stage of fulfilling the Sword and Will Kickstarter when the books get in. Is just putting on a series we've already seen and just doing that together. It's fun.